Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I am Mark Cashman here with my my co-host, Chris McNulty.
I see what you're doing there. Thanks. Well, today we're going to hear directly from the father of SharePoint, Jeff Teper, who's president of collaborative apps and platforms for us here at Microsoft. So we'll dig into everything we announced at the M365 keynote on May 2nd, as well as the blogs and the rest of the features and updates that we shared across the community last week.
Yeah, we grabbed time with Jeff on site in Vegas just shortly after he and his team delivered a whopping 90-minute whirlwind of opening keynote. And it was one that covered the value of community, Copilot, Teams, SharePoint, Copilot in SharePoint, OneDrive lists, and all the goodness for IT with recent admin and security innovation and more and more and more.
Yeah, it was just chock full of news and updates. And if you hung out longer, tons of news throughout the week on Viva, on Power Platform, from Kirk, from Charles Lamanna. So I thought it was just a really intense week. We also, I think, were hitting an inflection point in AI because there's just been so many Copilot announcements over the last 3 months. And this is how we are bringing those new AI services into SharePoint, which remains that foundation for everything that we're doing with intranets and with Teams and with Viva. It's just nice to see that come full circle.
It was really nice. And it was really, after a long chain of a number of Copilot announcements, I know you're on the Copilot committee, and landing this news for SharePoint specifically, couched between, all this great innovation. It was really nice to see how all the previous news had landed, because we got to chat in with people and ask them what they thought about X and Y. And then to see the real-time feedback on now Copilot in SharePoint was sort of a phew kind of moment. Release of new information and technology always comes with that little, well, how will they like it? How will they respond? And I know when we talk about events, there's another event coming up, Build. So certainly expect a lot more news from Microsoft specific to development and developers. Chris, before we jump in and hear from Jeff across the slew of innovation that he and his team are working on, I'd love to just hear from you. I know we got to chat and sync up, but your reactions post-event, whether they were your top moments or things that you were most excited that were now released and out there as news and information, but just to get your candid experience of how the Microsoft 365 conference went for Mr. McNulty.
I don't think my reactions are going to be too different from yours or other people's. First and foremost, the keynote was sort of the highlight of the week. Seeing all that innovation come together, whether it's the day one or the day two keynotes, there was just so much goodness with things like Copilot coming into Viva for OKRs and what you're going to be able to do with AI on Power Platform. The keynotes are definitely top of mind for me. I'd say second, I was involved with 3 sessions, but the one that I did with my good friend Sean Squires on Microsoft Syntax and basically catching up on everything that we've been shipping over the last 6 months was another highlight. Amongst other things, we were in the keynote room. It felt just huge to be in there, we had a little bit of fun with telling people it was the mid-afternoon keynote. And I would say just the quality of conversations in booth time. I cover a couple of different product areas with Viva and SharePoint and OneDrive. Syntax is top of mind for me. And I was really impressed with kind of the depth of questions and interest, both from the community as well as from customers. So not all the Syntax sessions were Microsoft sessions, which is wonderful to see. And I kind of felt like, especially in and around the Microsoft booth, customers are moving into a posture which is awesome, which is, I think I'm going to have to learn more about the syntax thing. Like, this seems to be something that can help. I want to understand how. That's a great place to be able to just go out and educate and share that excitement. What were some of your highlights, Mark?
I am going to be a yes and man to you because I enjoyed all of those things, and it's really nice to hear how your syntax session went. It's sometimes tough to be in the big room that was the big room, but it sounds like you both filled it with people and information, and that was a worthy time for you and the attendees, and that they're already up to speed. So they're really asking those not just what is it questions, but how might I take advantage of it, and what does it look like in my environment? I had a similar session, probably not in as big a room and as many people, but I always enjoy presenting with Michaela Barrett. She's one of our lead PMs for Microsoft Lists. And we got to show again what we had in the keynote, but then double click into some things that were real code and certainly with a little breath of air in between, not having to go so fast as we do in the keynote. And it was a real pleasure to see Michaela do what she does. She really always shows the product off really nicely, and she's very open to feedback. If I have to say one thing about Michaela, is she is a great listener. So it was really fun to present that session. We had some giveaways and some fun with the audience, and it's always nice, any product that you focus on, to get that feedback. The other thing that I got to do was I got to play host for the AMA and the closing keynote giveaways. So I worked with Dan and Caruana to help close out the keynote. They did all the work. I just had some of the fun. I got to do a couple of somersaults on stage.
You always have fun running, working the crowd.
It is a chance for me to obviously have fun. I think conferences are for fun and learning and for networking. And the AMA is sort of that on steroids, because with every question comes potential punnery and funnery. And yes, give me a microphone and it's a moment in time where I get to have some fun. And the last is, like any other event, just to reiterate, it's always really nice to see people that I haven't seen for a long time, and also an opportunity to meet new people, whether they come up and say, hey, I really enjoyed your blog, or that was fun, hearing you at the AMA, or just a general question and, trying to get the best answer either from me or guiding them to other peers, that would be at the show. Oh, you should go see so-and-so session and ask them this specific question and tell them Mark sent you, and then they can gripe at me later that I sent you to them. But overall, it was really fun. I think a lot of the community showed up. That's both Microsoft, MVPs, customers, partners. It was a busy week. So we want to jump right into the interview with Jeff. There was a ton that we covered. We were at the Microsoft 365 conference in Las Vegas, so it'll sound like we're in a conference room with all the busyness on Jeff's schedule. And as you know, what happens in Vegas goes live on the IntroZone in 3, 2, 1. All right, Mr. Teper, we're going to drill into what you shared today at the Microsoft 365 conference. So I hope the framing is, hey, Jeff, we want to learn a lot about what you and your team announced today, but not just the announcements. People can go to the blogs for
Sure.
that. We're hoping to drill into a little bit of how you got here, why the team kind of turned to this tact. Obviously, with Copilot, there's a lot of things that the whole company's doing. Yeah. But I first just want to get your sense, because we are taping here at the conference. First impressions after the keynote?
Yeah, it's always energizing to be part of these community events where so many of our fans and longtime supporters are here. And, every now and then the timing of the event coincides with at least one arc of news. And this time it's sort of hit an inflection point on two things. One is just, we've been making progress in Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint UI, fundamentals, performance, simplicity. And we had a really nice wave of great UI work, I think, from our design team, performance work and teams that we were able to talk about. But then the second arc, of course, is AI and Copilot, which is accelerated in the last 6 months as we've gotten GPT-3, 5, and 4 and integrated in our products. So it was, in some ways, a fun and stretched the limits of what we could do in a single keynote with all the stuff we showed across M365.
So just to set context, if you were at the show, then you're going to know a lot about what we were talking about. But the context was we had a 90-minute keynote, which is pretty long for what we normally do. And I think we filled it really nicely as far as, the end-to-end, which I hope we get into kind of all the little nooks and crannies. There's been a lot of talk around Copilot.
Sure.
And, I want to make sure everybody who's listening kind of gets your take on what is Copilot. The follow-up question, after kind of Copilot 101 is, Copilot is something that we're seeing now pervasive through a lot of Microsoft products. A lot of announcements within the last couple weeks. In fact, you framed it today in terms of the wave of AI.
Yeah.
And it is what to me sounds like a shared service. That might not be the right way to frame it, but that everybody's adopting and putting Copilot into their products in some fashion. It might be different in different ways. But I'd love to just understand the kind of cross-company thinking that you could represent, and then we'll really drill into what is Copilot in SharePoint.
Sure. If I can go back a little bit in time, if we go back even as much as 10 years ago, there was a couple of key building blocks we did in the Office suite. One was the concept of the graph that learns from all your content, the signals, honor security, and so forth, and is able to do recommendations for you. And so over the last several years, that graph evolved and powered more and more experiences. The second is the intelligence features in Office, certainly evolving from things like spell checking and grammar checking to PowerPoint Designer, to real-time language translation, transcription, and Teams. And so on both sides, both the data and the experience, we had sort of the fundamental building blocks of applying more intelligence to the experience. And then the language models we used, like as everybody's read, has taken a huge step function. We saw that a couple of years ago with the Codex language model we worked on with OpenAI, and how that model enabled a user experience called Copilot, designed to help developers write more code. And it was sort of one more turn of the crank, if you will, 3.5 and then 4.0, sort of two turns of the crank, where the language models got expressive enough that the average information worker's words, grounded by the data in the graph, which again, we've been working on for a decade, and driving the experience in the Office applications, which we've been working on in Office and Teams and more, would let you create and summarize in ways that were far beyond people's expectations. So it was really last year when that next round of language models came out that we started seeing in our prototypes really breakthrough experiences. And so we did absolutely put the pedal to the metal to drive a lot of things to market fairly quickly.
Yeah, and you feel like that's what people, as they start to learn the what is it doing, the kind of the behind the scenes, where I know sometimes with a lot of our customers, when we come up with something newer, we position something as kind of a new experience, grounding it in existing technology. We're not recreating the wheel. We may have a wonderful innovation, but we're not breaking the boundaries of where your content is being stored or how it can be accessed. But
exactly.
But the natural language aspect of it, and of course, saving people time, getting to the end result faster.
Yeah, no, these three pieces, the app commanding, the language model, and the graph had been around for a long time. And we envisioned some of these scenarios. The language models just were, frankly, they were starting to do breakthrough things. Like we now take for granted that it can do real-time voice transcription and translation in a meeting. It's sort of, ho-hum, somebody could be speaking to Japanese to you in a Teams meeting and to be translated in real time to you in Spanish. 10 years ago, that would have seemed magical. And it's powered by a language model. So it's the same arc of technology. It's just these new models using this transformer algorithm approach and dramatically higher scale of the complexity of the models that is enabled by a couple of new generations of GPUs, gave them new capabilities. But the basic approach has been around for a while.
That's the thing. I almost equate it to when we first started going to BPOS and Office 365.
Yeah.
A lot of people were asking like, oh gosh, this is Microsoft, first time in the cloud. And then I saw a wonderful talk around Windows Update.
Yeah.
How Windows Update has been, at scale for tons of, years and time and scale.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody in Microsoft Research the other day at an event. Susan Dumais, longtime Microsoft research leader. Some people have been working on this space for 20 plus years. It's just like we saw with cloud or GUI, mobile, bandwidth. Eventually the technology materializes in a way that's magical for an end user. And that's what came up with the LLM.
So you and your team showed some magic today.
Yeah.
We got to unveil some nice demos.
Yeah.
There's also blogs and everything, so people can go and check it out visually. Do you have a favorite part of the Copilot in SharePoint? And then maybe we can enumerate just a couple of the announcements.
Yeah. Well, it was as I said, it was tricky because whenever you're doing two things, you have to sort of lose one as your hero message. Independent of any AI, the UI work that our design PM and engineering team had done for OneDrive lists and SharePoint is a big step function forward. And I know it's like people are, oh, like Jeff says that at every event. But no, just go look at OneDrive lists and SharePoint, what we blog today. And it's really a leap ahead in sort of the design aesthetic, things like how we use animation, the ease in which people can manipulate images. And so that timing is perfect to go alongside with Copilot, because if the basic rich design capabilities are there in SharePoint, it means the LLM as well as an end user can drive them. And so, I love the fact that, Denise Tribona showed today in the blog that Adam Harmitz posted. So it goes through and you just want to make a website. I want to make a website. I want it to have a video. I want it to list some people on it. And it uses all those rich new design capabilities that we could have shipped independently of Copilot. And Copilot takes advantage of them. And so I look at this as chapter 3 for SharePoint. Chapter 1 was when we first released, we took websites from a developer project to an end user activity. Press a button, get a SharePoint site in seconds. Chapter 2 was you didn't even have to deploy a server. We ran it for you in the cloud. So you didn't even need IT to deploy and upgrade and set up farms and load balancing and backup and archive and security patching and a trillion other things. So we took another chunk of work, if you will, out of making engaging intranets. And chapter 3 is we want, even though the new SharePoint UI we've had the last few years is much simpler and richer, we wanted to give people the level of expressivity they see on completely custom built websites. But again, with that third chapter of magic, like take all the work. I want it to look like this beautiful website, but I wanted to do that in seconds. So I think it's a nice end to the trilogy, if you will. Not end, but there'll be a 4th step, don't worry. But I think it's a nice third phase for SharePoint along the same theme of democratizing great engaging content for your company.
I was just about to say, I'm going to pick up your book, but if it's not finished yet.
Yeah, no. I'll be like George R. R. Martin.
And I have to also say your publisher is very gracious because you publish a chapter about every 5 years.
Yes.
So certainly to be able to create a site using more natural language and also alongside it, take advantage of a lot of the design and layout capabilities. There's also I'm ready to communicate internally. And maybe I've done some work in a document or a PowerPoint, or I want to blend some of those together. One of the demos that we saw was I want to basically create a new page. So there's a new start experience, and then there's a step to go create a page. But in the page creation using Copilot, it was, I want to write an article about, and then point to existing Word document. And off of that, the demo showed basically creating a beautiful SharePoint page, possibly a news article. And there's a lot that goes into that. And I think the parsing out what is in the Word document kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But what else is going on there that, from a end user, not IT, that is just going to go to the start, create a new page and be able to create it without doing a lot of heavy lifting?
One thing the team did really well, and we talked about this a lot, is step back. In product management, there's a phrase called jobs to be done, user jobs and so forth. And, we went back to basics of you've got somebody who wants to create compelling content, but they may already have some of the information, but they don't have the time or the skills to make it as polished as they would love to make it polished. But the job doesn't end there. They want it to be consumed. Nobody goes and creates a page on SharePoint for their own benefit. Mm-hmm. And so I love that there's 2 parts to this. One is we can take as input, an Office document and generate a page, knowing, the kinds of layouts that would be engaging with photos, maybe videos. We have this web part in SharePoint I love that's sort of the pictures of the team working on it, because it lets you celebrate the work of a group with people's faces. It lets the reader know who to reach out for information and so forth. Going hand in, we announced, brand center and custom fonts and the fact that Copilot will be able to use those kinds of things. But again, it doesn't stop there. And so we also announced, building on some things we've done with Viva Engage and Connections and Teams, the ability to get this content read. And my favorite feature, and the team laughs, like I tell them this is the best feature we've done in the history of SharePoint. And they say, this is pretty good, but I don't know why you love it quite that much, is the email feature, where you can take a page in SharePoint and email it to people and share it out. In Inline and Outlook, it looks as good as it does on the website. And that was a phenomenal amount of complicated engineering work with the Outlook team to make that so. But the user doesn't do it. The first time we had this internal dog food, and I do this Fast Friday update, it's a SharePoint page with a video inside it. And, I format a little bit and send it to the team. And it shows up as people's inbox, and they don't even have to click through it. And it looks great. It doesn't look like a boring, dry email. So this new Copilot capability will not only help people generate content that looks compelling, but it will also get it in people's inbox, into Viva feeds, into Teams. You'll be able to do editing and posting of stuff inside Teams channels, per se. And so that's ultimately what the user is trying to do, is create great content that gets read.
Yeah. And the full cycle of it is, and you did it by yourself.
Yes.
Because oftentimes you can write a nice Word document and then probably hand it off to somebody who's handling internal comms, and they'll HTML it or put it into a template.
I knew too much about how HTML formatting and email formats work with, the history of this, rich text format a million years ago, and HTML and MIME and like a million other things. And I was like, oh God, this is never going to work. And they're like, well, it's going to be like a lot of iteration, and we'll have to make some trade-offs for interoperability and so forth. But once the first time I just used it, it was like, wow, there was no fix up.
And I think I've seen it in real use, not just in the demos. And it is one of those features where it just works.
Yeah.
And you just know that if it's an important communication that you want to spend time on, kind of like you do with the Fast Fridays, you want it to not only be in somebody's inbox, but you want it to be something that they actually want to read. Yeah. And it's easy.
Yeah. And it differentiates from sort of like a more communications oriented email, which is the sort of 3-liner, like, I approve this decision. Let's discuss it tomorrow or something like that.
So switching topics a little bit, a lot of times in the keynote or in any presentation, or just really your portfolio that you represent, you talk about the things that are powered by SharePoint. And, there are other things that we announced around SharePoint, and I encourage, as you did, for people to read Adam's blog and whatnot. Yeah. But to talk about the 3 areas that are built on SharePoint that we talked about and showed today, starting with Stream. And the 2 features that I wanted to highlight is that there's a new updated Stream web part, and hopefully of interest, and I hope a lot of use in the future, are the video page templates.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time, as people probably know, in the last couple of years of hosting video on SharePoint and doing it super well. The reason we wanted to do that is to bring all the collaboration and compliance capabilities you had for documents and sites to videos, both publish streamed videos in Teams meetings, recordings. So a lot of work went into that, and performance fundamentals, transcoding, et cetera, But ultimately, our goal is to get past all that work to get to some pretty mind-blowing experiences for the work. And you see some of them in the Teams Copilot Teams Premium with the recap and the chaptering and so forth. Stream team does that work in partnership with the Teams team. But the work you just described is, okay, now that the videos are in SharePoint, we shouldn't just have sort of a dry folder view of it. People want to build sort of engaging, again, going to highlight certain videos. And so the Stream web part, which is sort of the basic building block of how you can add a great video to any page, and then the templates and page layouts for the different types of, is it a hero page about a particular recording, or is it a playlist? We work really closely with the Stream team and our design teams to sort of see not just what was best in class on intranets, but what were we seeing on the internet that was sort of the best produced, best designed views of a collection of video, and just give it to people. And again, not have to have a developer or web designer be a part of it. Just have an end user say, yeah, these are my 5 videos. Here we go.
Yeah.
And we do this all, like, look at this conference. Wouldn't we take the videos for these conferences and put them, in line for our own employees?
Yep. I think of the days past when we did things like Tech Ready.
Yeah.
Which externally, that's our internal training for field. Sometimes had 600, 700 sessions over the course of 5 days that nobody could ever get to all of them.
Yeah.
But they were decently cataloged. But I know the behind the scenes of going from what was encoded in the box in the room to get it onto, viewership later if you weren't able to attend. That takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And to take that away, especially if you don't want to be the person cataloging, you want to be the person who's amplifying and making sure that people have access.
And you can imagine where that will go next with things like Copilot, where we'll extract a lot of information from, key topics, presenters, chaptering, hero moments from the video, and then that'll be used to generate rich views in the page content around the videos. And I think you'll be able to drag and drop a collection of videos to OneDrive to stream wherever and they'll all get under the covers to SharePoint. And then you'll say, make this new video page of it. And hopefully we'll keep taking all the work out of making it more and more engaging.
Do you expect that you're going to put any sound effects into SharePoint so that when this happens, there's going to be like a magician's sound or magic sound?
Absolutely. The red carpet will roll out as you enter the runway and you get the Academy Award for Best Video.
I love it.
Yes.
So switching topics again from Stream, we shared a lot around lists. And I thought I'd share one thing that literally happened 30 minutes ago. I was down in the expo hall, and one of the people who had attended your session this morning came up and said, I have a kudo that I want to give, and I'm not sure who to give it to, but they knew me from the community. And so they said, I love what you guys are doing with lists, especially the forms work. Who do I tell that so they know they're doing great work? So I pointed them over to Jason Moore, who was just heading over there. So nice conversation they had. It was really nice to hear the direct feedback. And I just wanted to use that as a way where there's a lot of forms capabilities that have been in SharePoint for quite some time, but has never been a front and center consume, just collect somebody's information and put it into the list. Always required to go to the list or kind of know what you're doing. Yeah. This abstracts it, and I'd just love to hear a little of the thinking around it.
Yeah. I, like a million years ago when I joined Microsoft, one of my first jobs was being as a developer evangelist, and we hosted a satellite broadcast. There was no webcast to launch what was then Visual Basic 2. And the idea was, how could we reduce the amount of work for building a form on a database? Visual Basic 2 is the first version of Visual Basic that had native database capabilities. I say all this not to distract, but I've been in this space for a long time and can appreciate there's this spectrum all the way up to professional developers who do database design and modeling and SQL, NoSQL, Dataverse, custom apps. And, there's a need for all that for very sophisticated apps. But the thing that I've always been attracted to from the days of VB and through sort of doing SharePoint is democratization. How can we take the things that cool kids are doing and make anybody do it and have it look great in a fraction of the time? So just like we were talking about SharePoint, the team, we had some new people join the list team. Jason Moore runs product management for Steve Bailey runs engineering. But there were new people on the team that said, hey, we have an idea, a fresh view on this list thing, where if we think we can make it both look better and take even more work out of it. And I said, let's see what you got.
You're talking my language.
And they came back, and I hope people see, the overall lists experience. Like if anybody's listening who's not looked at lists.
Did you say listening?
Listening. Yes. Maybe if I had some Listerine, I would speak more clearly. There you go.
Fresh breath out of Jeff's mouth.
Do not get in a pun war with Mark Cashman. You may volley, but you'll never win the point. So the new list experience is great. The craft that has gone into the web UI is great in the list view on lists. But the data entry was not as good as sort of a tailored app. And so we said, how can we get close? And so the team came up with that. And I think it looks fantastic. You can share it outside the organization. And, it obviously is, one of my heroes a million years ago was Ray Ozzie in what he did with Lotus Notes. And, so we would talk periodically. Are you generating the form from the database or the database from the form? In this case, it's just like, you have the database, if you will. You have session, presenter, time, level, topic, and boom, you get the form that looks great.
When I first saw that, and my reaction was, this can't be real. What is the tech they're using for the form? But then my second observation was seeing them actually design the formatting fields that they wanted to collect and have that be translated into a column was getting created on the back end. So if you know list, that's pretty easy. You go plus column. But in the form, building the data behind, it was really nice.
Yeah, there's people who understand the deep history of like the journey that Access took on forms versus Schema and Lotus Notes took. And oh my God, if you don't know either one of those, like, because they were a long time ago, don't worry about it. The key word is it's just easy. You can just describe what you want and the thing is generated.
Well, it got some nice claps.
Yeah.
I knew that it would, and it was really nice to see that interaction with somebody who really genuinely wanted to tell the engineering team, great job.
Yeah, good.
So there's a number of other lists announcements, and certainly showed a number of things that we've actually been working on in the consumer space with the list.live.com, where you sign in with your Microsoft account. And that's been actually one of the number one questions that I've been getting is, I see it in the list preview. Is it coming to commercial? And it seems like what we call Project Spartan internally. Mm-hmm. And to me, that just translates into better UX and better performance.
Yeah.
But can you just describe for everybody that set of work that's coming? What, that Forms is getting a crank turn for UX and ease of use, but the whole of the List's product is getting faster and easier to use.
Yeah. And these products that are web tech, SharePoint being the longest one, SharePoint, I'm not sure if OWA predated it or not, but certainly SharePoint was probably one of the earliest things in the Office broadly defined organization that was built on web tech. And then, lists and OneDrive and, Teams is a hybrid of web tech. Is every few years, there's a new generation of web tech about what you can do. So we went from server-side rendering to client-side rendering in the future of SharePoint. We were able to leverage service workers and web workers, which is sort of more background processing, on and on. WebAssembly, there's, a whole bunch of new stuff out now. And so it's always a little bit of a tricky thing where can I refactor the code base without rewriting it all to take advantage of this new thing? Or is it such a fundamentally different paradigm? Do I have to go rewrite everything? And occasionally it is a major rewrite. That's sort of what SharePoint classic to modern was. In a gross oversimplification, it was a shift from server-side rendering in ASP.NET to client-side rendering in TypeScript and React. In the new Teams that's in preview, there's a lot of architectural changes, but it's a different JavaScript framework, a common data model, much more asynchronicity in the UI as opposed to synchronous calls and so forth. And so we're doing that again in lists under the covers, where the list view, we can have a pretty dramatic leap in performance using two things. One is the underlying database. If we've got OneDrive on the client, uses a light version of SQL that is more powerful than the database that the browser ships with called IndexedDB. And so when you hear us talk about nucleus and offline and giant lists, that's what enables us to do this. And this sort of view is our team refactored the code base into a new list control under the covers. It won't require a modern or classic thing. It'll just be, everything will be seen twice as fast that we're going to use in lists in OneDrive in this, what we call Spartan control. And we've used the code name Spartan like 5 times in the history of Microsoft. So like, I don't want anybody to know.
Do they still crack the same joke?
Yeah.
We are Spartan.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, we're going to see a pretty dramatic. I think the list performance is already best in class, but it's mind-blowingly good with this new control. And, it was a way for us to, when you're making a big change like this, you don't want to make it big bang. You don't want to rewrite for a couple of years and then put it all in the code base at once. You want to find a way to bring some subset of it to market sooner, to stabilize it, to validate it. If people are familiar with what we did in Teams, we actually took some of the new React CDL code in Teams and shipped it inside Teams 1 and never talked about it. The Teams consumer client in Windows 11 actually includes that code base. But until we finished all the work and did the new Teams preview back in March, we really didn't talk about it much. And so, this is a long, geeky, technical answer. But, this new engine, if you will, that will be in lists in OneDrive across consumer and commercial, a way to bring it to market in an incremental way was the list consumer experience. And we validated, stabilized it, and then we can bring it more places.
Yeah, I was talking to Michaela Barrett, and she said we've begun to scale the preview even beyond what we originally targeted.
Yeah.
I don't think we can quote numbers here, but it's a pretty significant amount of people are now using the list preview, more so than when we intended for the preview. And that it's going well, and it's brought a lot of learning both to lists, some of the work that goes into the OneDrive UI. The part that I wanted to kind of land on, besides maybe just a couple of extra features and then move to actually talk about OneDrive, was I've heard you now mention a couple of times either what I was asking you around Copilot and kind of how we're pervasively using it in lots of places, but this notion of a common control. I'm not asking so much the technical question, but how often are we more pushing to have that thing that we do in this product be the actual same thing that we do in another product? Like I think of a shared sharing control or a similar files experience, or like you were just saying, leveraging Spartan and more than just lists.
I have a long history here. The easy cases are easy. The hard cases are hard. So it's sort of, you have to look at them one by one. In the case of sharing, Jason Moore, Omar Shaheen before him, Steve Bailey, really tried to stress that the engineering inefficiency and end user cacophony of having a different sharing control was quite expensive. But it was a journey when it now ships on all 5 platforms and in, however many apps, I don't know, 8, 10 apps. But there was a lot of hurdles for it to go through. Like, was it fast enough? There were some teams that wanted to write it in native code. And so we did some work a year, 18 months ago, where we shaved, 600-700 milliseconds off it, where it got unnoticeably different from native code performance. There were differences on the expectations that control in Teams, because there you wanted one of the options to be inherit the permissions of the channel or something like that. So you can't just write the code once and just ship it everywhere. You have to understand the context. And the execution has to be really good. And I can't speak for other tech companies, but when you do these shared things in a company like Microsoft, we have to deliver. And so in the sharing control is a good example. We did deliver the search experience is another one where we in SharePoint inherit the search experience from the search team. The people experience, that was actually another good one. Our friends in the FAST team in Norway do the people experience, including things like the LinkedIn integration for that. And it was just we all got aligned in theory that we wanted this control, but it was just a little bit slow at the beginning, both in Outlook and Teams. And the Outlook and Teams team said, we don't want to take the perfit. And so, you have to really dive into the details to tease those things out. And so we're getting better and better at this. The most recent example being the files control, which is a lot more complicated control that we use not only in OneDrive, but SharePoint and Teams, and eventually we'll use more places. And that's a big control. So the perf challenges and learnings we had for sort of these littler things like sharing and people was sort of paramount. There's other places where we sort of haven't tackled it yet, like should the page authoring environment in SharePoint be the same component as Word or Loop. We've looked at that in the past, and we're sort of tempted, but it turns out the differences for what people need in web publishing are pretty key differences than, say, Word and its interoperability and formatting expectations. So there's definitely been places we've looked at it and said, no, we can't do that, at least not yet.
Yeah. The last thought I had that you got me thinking of was a time when somebody, after we started doing a little bit more of a common experience across, a lot of it was in OneDrive, certainly things that show up in SharePoint and Teams that are similar, was the consultant basically saying, I have to write less user training materials the more that you have a shared control, because it is then more a consistent experience for the end user.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's actually one of the interesting discussions we're having going on now is the Microsoft 365 app in OneDrive have slight differences from sort of local innovations in the UI. And I agree with that person. But I will give you an example is the Microsoft 365 landing page lets you see files that are not just in OneDrive and SharePoint, but they may be emails, attachments, or they may be things that live in other systems, say, Figma that's been indexed through connectors. And so I think the time's right that we can just show those in the OneDrive recommended view as well. But then it's what people might say, well,
It's not really my stuff.
It's not a file, but yes, it is. And does the user care whether? And so there are some places where we're on these consistency where we do want to go back to users and say, okay, we think we're going to treat these as the same thing going forward. Does that add simplicity for you? Does that add confusion? And that's one I think we're optimistic about, but we're going to keep testing.
The nice thing is the scale that you operate and your team operates, you will always get plenty of feedback.
Yes, for sure.
So I have two more questions for you. And one is a little bit of a comment that you made internally. And it's not a scary one for me to share with the world, but it really kind of changed the tact of how should we think about the recent OneDrive innovation that we just announced today. And it's been, I think it's definitely evolution. But some of them are pretty big bets on, just making things more simple and easier to use. But as the team was readying to post the blog, they used the word refreshed. And in the notes, at least what I was reviewing, that was one word that you said, I don't want to use the word refreshed. And just based on now, if people were to go read the blog, not so much to argue the title is right or wrong, but for what the team was publishing and putting out, what was it about refreshed? And maybe in the context of sharing why.
Yeah, I'm not sure I was right, but let me talk through it. And because it'd be good to get your take and certainly people listen, ultimately people listen to this are the ones that decide. It's pretty rare in technology to have these products and brands that are around for a long time, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so inevitably, they do need to be, for lack of a better term, modernized to leverage new technologies, new aesthetics, new paradigms, new device types, and so forth. And, we've used all sorts of monikers over the years. The first thing I got to market at Microsoft, if you will, was the shift to Windows NT, new technology. It's the better version of Windows, the industrial strength version of Windows. We used modern in several places where, that was always a tough one because you were saying, you were making a very clear statement that you were setting expectations. There was a change that needed to be learned. And it was, you're really by design choosing language that was saying, the thing you already have is not any good anymore. And, we chose that word. It was such a leap in 2016. We said, this is the modern SharePoint UI. But you can't keep doing that. You can't just say, here's the modern. So I felt like the experiences we had for OneDrive, SharePoint, and lists were really good, but we had a chance with this wave to make them great. And I was worried if we used the language like modern, classic, refreshed, reimagined was another one. You remember like reimagined was like we were reimagining everything. I worried when I was reading that blog that we were going to scare people that this was a new thing to learn. And that was right now the last thing people wanted was unnecessarily learning. So I definitely think, particularly in the case of the OneDrive UI, it feels like a very natural step forward. It is way more polished. It introduces some new views for people in meetings, but it's not a refresh implying that you have to relearn the information architecture of OneDrive. I was probably, now that we're doing this podcast, maybe a little picky and reading more into the word refreshed, but I was just trying not to do a modern again. And it was just like, if you like OneDrive, you're going to love the new OneDrive.
Yeah. I think the way that it's positioned now, based on the change, for sure, but also just in the blog, in the language of people kind of digesting it now, hearing some initial feedback and how people are actually reading it. It does, I think, play off better if people do realize, unless it is a big shift and we've changed significantly. But really, the enhanced user experience is always going to be something's new, whether that's refreshed or not. But I think
refresh is probably fine.
But I think
reimagine would be good.
Reimagine is the one that I wasn't in favor of, but refresh new.
Yeah.
But the value of what the team is doing, you kind of said, if you
who cares what you call it? It's what the users think of it that matters.
Get to the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
And that's where the good stuff is anyway.
Yeah.
But it's been really great to see new home experience, leveraging the graph more, being a little bit more in tune with how people go looking for things. Oh, is in that meeting, or that person shared with me. Just pivoting on those, I think it's really nice. And I think always the one that got claps, but also, a question that I got at the booth was, you're still working on sharing. And the goal this time was to make it even more simple, but yet still same power, the same ability to share in the way that you want, but more naturally. And I think that the way that the UI came out is it wasn't I have to learn now how to share all over again. I just now can hopefully do it a little bit faster without as much thinking of what I'm doing.
Sharing is like the hardest design problem of all time, because sharing means different things to different people, and they do it a lot. So you have to think about the simplicity axis and the flexibility axis. And that's like a designer's job, to sort of push to the efficient frontier, the upper right of flexible and simple, which is really hard. Usually when you add flexibility, you reduce simplicity. And I think each time we've taken a crack at the sharing dialogue, we've made progress. But we always get this feedback, and it's barbell feedback. There's a set of people who said, oh, thank you so much. You made this work like an attachment in email that can just be forwarded around. You don't get those damn access denied things. Mm-hmm. It's exactly what I want. But then you get like, oh no, you've reduced the friction for somebody to do unintended sharing. That's bad. How do I lock that thing down and turn it off? And so I think through some design choices and good default choices about in this new dialogue, by the time we update it later in the year, if whoever you address it to, it's just permission to them. But if you copy the link, it's very clear that unless you've changed it, or either IT or the users, that it's a shareable link, just like you'd intend it to. So I think it's tested really well. We'll see people's feedback. I think the fundamental design is sound. Maybe we have to tweak the defaults. But by the way, one of the favorite parts of this is we sort of look at what did Google do? What did Dropbox do? Mm-hmm. And it's clear when they copied us and when we were influenced by them. This is like nobody's found the perfect thing. But I think when we ship this thing, we will set the new state of the art. But of course, somebody might, all our competitors might copy it the day later, and so be it.
We'll see. You introduced a really interesting character after the keynote. And you introduced this character who's already been around. People know who it is. But I have to ask you, how did you bring Bart Simpson into the May 2 news?
He had such a build-up of that thing. Well, everybody's favorite meme generator is that chalkboard meme that's at the beginning of The Simpsons. And so there's this site, of course, where you can type in things. And there's probably no more recurring topic that I get tweeted on than, Jeff, somebody spelled SharePoint with a lowercase p. And of course, it's most egregious when somebody in Microsoft does it. We do make a spell checker, so we should spell check these things. And so I just thought, I started to see people mistype Copilot internally a few months ago. And I said, thank God somebody else has the P problem besides just SharePoint. And I thought, a few months ago, as you know, I said, somebody's going to do Copilot with a capital P in SharePoint with lowercase p. So then I went into the Bart Simpson meme generator, and somebody gave me a good tweet setup for it, and so I replied it to them.
I thought it was good. That's the thing, is it's buried in a reply, which is fine. I will make sure that in the show notes for this episode, I'm going to grab the graphic that you created, and I'll quote and give you all the credit.
Yes.
Wonderful day. I hope you're jazzed.
I am super jazzed.
It's in the rearview mirror, but it also means there's a ton of work to come to actually make it real. I want to thank you for the time today, and hope that the rest of your conference is a good one.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone, for being with us on this journey and listening in. I think this is our best work yet, but ultimately, you get to decide, and we can't wait to hear your feedback.
Now, you have heard it from Jeff. That means it's real, it's public, it's disclosed, and it is what the team is working on. Let us now transition over to events. Usually Chris is our transition to events person, but I wanted to touch on one event from the past because, Chris, I am curious, just before the Microsoft 365 conference, if you weren't busy enough yet, there was the AIM conference a few weeks ago. Can you give us a quick high level of how AIM went?
We were proud to be the sponsor, the AIM conference. AIM is an industry association that is vendor neutral. So lots of partners and, frankly, lots of competing solutions will be shown at an event like this. So it's wonderful to be able to learn from not just from what our customers are trying to discover, but also what patterns are out there that where Microsoft can learn from. AIM is a nonprofit. I'm also a member of the board of directors. And so it's great for us to be able to bring people together for education. I would say rather selfishly, I had two highlights of the week. One is because we do have a lot of partners there. We do a mini summit with our partners to basically just walk through the latest product and market updates kind of from across Syntex and Viva and Teams and PowerPlat and all the rest. Our keynote was delivered by Marco Casalena. He is in the Azure AI team, and it was a really powerful keynote. He had one slide explaining Syntex, and he showed a new feature that we had just shipped just in time for the AIM conference, which is pre-built AI models for contracts. So he showed that, but then he just spent half an hour showing all the behind-the-scenes tech that makes Syntex hum, that make AI Builder and all the rest of our AI using kind of the basic Azure APIs to be able to classify pictures, classify videos, extract field values from just blocks of text by being able to apply textual analytics and just understand the context of what's being said. Even if, looking at a deed and being able to say, even though it's just a straight paragraph, pull out those name value pairs so that you can do interesting search and compliance and workflow things with them. It was just really cool to see. And Marco just lands a great keynote. He makes the complex very simple. And so it was a very, I think, relatable set of technologies to showcase there.
That's cool. Microsoft Syntex is certainly a more complex solution, certainly both a brand, but a lot happening behind the scenes and a lot of great work between teams that sometimes don't always get the air cover to be able to talk about what is actually happening and make sense of it. And it's really nice to take something that is a wonderful solution that has its complexities and to hear that it is landing, in a way that a lot of people can now understand it. So if we went back to back, or I should say you went back to back from AIM to Microsoft 365 conference, the next opportunity for training and landing some of what it is that you hopefully would want to hear from Microsoft and our community is happening at Collab Days Poland. This is in Warsaw, and it's on May 13th, 2023. This is formerly what was known as the SharePoint Saturdays Warsaw, and is a session lineup with a whole bunch of Microsoft MVPs and some of the top Polish speakers working with Microsoft solutions. So May 13th, Collab Days Poland.
Coming up after that, for Power Automate and Power Apps, looking at all of the goodness of the Power Platform, the Developer Bootcamp Automation Summit 2023. That can be held at Microsoft's Paddington office in London, just near Paddington Station, May 19th and 20th.
If you didn't hustle over to Collab Days Poland, and maybe you're a little bit more Italian, there is the Collab Days Italy. That's on May 20th, 2023 in Milan. There are 15 sessions, and if you look at the sessions list, you'll see that there's a lot of great speakers that speak often at a number of different events. And again, it's always really great to see this as a nice packed day, very regionally specific. So if you're in Italy, hustle over to Milan, May 20th, Collab Days Italy.
And even more goodness across the pond, European Collaboration Summit, May 22nd to 24th. That'll be at the Dusseldorf Fair in Germany. The Microsoft keynote will be delivered by Vesa Juvonen, Lori Pottmeyer, Dan Holm, Steven Siciliana, and Pune Kaufman.
And if you are a developer, there's another big packed show that's just waiting literally within that same time frame. It is Microsoft Build 2023. This is going to be both a hybrid event, so there will be some global, digital, and in-person in Seattle. This, of course, is an event for developers, or as our old friend Steve used to say, for developers, for developers, for developers. There's a Satya Nadella keynote. Definitely register for this. It is a free event, but it is not free of news. There will be a ton to share at Microsoft Build, so definitely not one to miss.
Also coming up later this month, back here in the US, Document Strategy Forum 2023. That'll be at the Meridian Hotel in Charlotte, North Carolina, May 22nd through 24th. Microsoft is the content services sponsor, and I'll be doing a joint keynote there with good friend of the program, Alan Pell-Sharp.
We've got two more for you. The second to last one is Collab Days Netherlands. Same approach with a really wonderful day full of great speakers, great content, regionalized on June 10th, 2023. This is in Vienna and Utrecht, and expect a lot of great goodness if you're in the Netherlands. Hustle over to Collab Days Netherlands.
And wrapping up June, 365 EduCon coming to Washington, D.C., June 12th through 16th. Always great to see what's coming from what used to be SharePoint Fest and is now 365 EduCon, with lots of content from left to right across Microsoft.
Just as an FYI, I know that the Microsoft Teams team is leaning in on the DC show and planning on having Caruana Getimu there as well. So, even though, like Chris said, the breadth of the entire conference is really spanning tons of products and lots of great solution-oriented approaches, there is a focus on Microsoft Teams in DC.
And of course, if you have an event coming up, we would love to feature it on an upcoming episode of the Intro Zone. So please write to us and we'd be happy to put the spotlight there. Thanks.
Thank you to our guest, the father of SharePoint, Jeff Teper, for being on the show and for bringing both his A game and his A team to the Microsoft 365 conference.
We'll encourage you to check out our show page for links to everything we talked about today and more. Visit us at aka.ms/theintrozone.
You can send us or send Copilot in SharePoint questions and feedback for anything that you have around OneDrive, SharePoint, all the related technologies in Microsoft 365. You can reach us via email at theintrozone@microsoft.com or track us down on Twitter at SharePoint, at mcashman, and at cmcnulty2000.
Remember to rate, review, and tell all your friends about the show and how Chris McNulty made it through almost an entire broadcast without a gratuitous sports reference.
Come on, we got the Sounders are doing good. The Kraken are doing good. I went and saw a rain game yesterday.
We had a great time at the Mariners game last weekend.
Excellent. You took one out to the ball game. Excellent.
Follow us wherever you get your favorite tech or sports podcasts.
We thank you for listening. We are your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty, and this has been The Intro Zone, a show about the Microsoft 365 conference-infused intelligent intranet.